What happens when one of television's most fearless interviewers sits across from someone who expects nothing but softball questions and royal treatment? You're about to find out, and trust me, this gets explosive. The studio lights blazed hot, casting their familiar glow across the polished desk where Piers Morgan sat, straightening his tie with the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced prime ministers, presidents, and plenty of difficult celebrities. His producer had warned him this might be a challenging interview, but Piers thrived on challenges. That was part of what made him one of the most respected journalists in the business. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest, Piers began, his voice carrying that distinctive authority viewers had come to expect. Someone who has been making headlines around the world and, I'm sure, has plenty to say about recent events. Please welcome Meghan Markle. The applause was polite but measured as Meghan walked onto the set. Her smile was perfectly practiced, her posture radiating the calm confidence that comes from years of media training. She settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone expecting gentle questions and a friendly exchange. "Meghan, thank you for joining us tonight," Piers said, leaning forward slightly, already reading the room. "I know you've had quite a lot to say recently about your experiences, and I think our viewers would appreciate some honest answers to some direct questions." Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, barely perceptible, but Piers caught it. "Of course, Piers. I'm always happy to set the record straight and speak my truth." "Your truth," he repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. "That's an interesting phrase you've been using quite a bit lately. But I'm more interested in the truth, if you don't mind. The actual facts." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop a degree. Meghan shifted in her chair, keeping her composure. "I think my truth is the truth, Piers. I've lived through these experiences." "Absolutely. And no one is questioning your experiences," he replied smoothly, his tone professional but firm. "However, when you make public statements that contradict documented facts, well, that's where journalism comes in. That's where I come in." Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Piers said, opening the folder in front of him with deliberate precision. "I'm asking direct questions, which is what journalists do. For instance, you've made several claims about your wedding that don't align with the public record. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself has clarified that your secret garden ceremony never actually happened as you described it." "That's a private matter," Meghan responded, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "I don't think it's appropriate to discuss the intimate details of my wedding." Piers let the weight of her words settle before responding. "But you discussed it publicly, Meghan. In great detail. On international television. You can't make public claims and then declare them private when questioned about their accuracy." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing the shift. "I think you're being unnecessarily aggressive," Meghan said, her smile becoming strained. "I came here in good faith to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Asking for factual accuracy isn't an attack," Piers replied calmly, his years of experience showing in his composure. "It's journalism. If you make public statements, especially ones that paint others in a negative light, those statements should be accurate. Wouldn't you agree?" Meghan's hands clasped together in her lap, her knuckles whitening slightly. "I think you're twisting my words." "I'm reading your words," Piers said, holding up a transcript. "You said, and I quote, that you were married 3 days before the public. Ceremony in a private ceremony in your backyard with just the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop has since stated that this was not a legal marriage ceremony but merely a private exchange of vows. Yet you presented it as your actual wedding. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "I think you're focusing on semantics rather than the emotional truth of what happened," Meghan finally said, irritation creeping into her voice. "The important thing is what it meant to us personally." Semantics? Piers leaned back slightly, surprised. Meghan, you told millions of people around the world that you had a secret wedding ceremony. That's not semantics. That's a factual claim. And when the person who supposedly performed that ceremony says it didn't happen as you described, that's not semantics either. That's a contradiction that deserves clarification. Meghan's composure began to crack, just slightly, but enough for Piers to notice. Her smile grew forced, her posture stiffened. I don't appreciate being called a liar on national television. I haven't called you anything, Piers responded evenly. I've simply asked you to clarify statements you made publicly that appear to contradict the facts. If you feel that's unfair, perhaps you could help our viewers understand where the confusion lies. The tension in the studio was palpable. What had started as a standard celebrity interview was rapidly becoming something much more contentious. I think you're being deliberately obtuse, Meghan said, her voice rising. You know exactly what I meant. Actually, I don't, Piers replied, his tone still professional despite the growing hostility. And neither do our viewers. That's why we're having this conversation, to get clarity on these important issues you've made public. Meghan stood up abruptly, then sat back down, clearly wrestling with how to handle the situation. Her team of advisors, visible just off camera, exchanged worried glances. I came here expecting a fair interview, she said, her voice edged with anger. Not an interrogation. A fair interview includes fair questions, Piers replied calmly. And fair questions sometimes require uncomfortable answers. That's the nature of journalism, Meghan. Surely you understand that. The studio atmosphere had shifted completely. What moments earlier had been a standard interview setup was now a battlefield of words, Piers holding firm to his journalistic stance, and Meghan struggling to maintain control. Let's move on to another topic, then, Piers said, consulting his notes with practiced ease. You've made some very serious allegations about racism within the royal family. These are incredibly damaging accusations that have had global repercussions. Can you provide any specific evidence to support these claims? Meghan's eyes flashed with something between anger and panic. I lived through it, Piers. That should be evidence enough. Personal experience is certainly valid, he acknowledged, his tone steady. But the air in the studio remained charged. This was no longer a polite conversation. It was a clash of narratives, and neither side intended to back down. But when you make accusations of institutional racism against one of the world's most scrutinized families, accusations that have impacted Britain's international reputation, it's understandable why people might expect more than just your word. Are you saying I'm lying about racism? Meghan's voice rose sharply, drawing the attention of several crew members. I'm asking for specifics, Piers replied evenly. You've made broad accusations but offered no concrete examples, no witnesses, no documentation. You mentioned conversations about your son's skin color, but you've refused to name who said what, when, or in what context. How can anyone address these allegations without details? Meghan shifted in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. I protected them by not naming names. I could have, but I chose not to. Protected them? Piers leaned forward, his instincts sharp. You've accused them of racism on international television. You painted the entire institution as discriminatory. How is that protection? I didn't name specific individuals, Meghan shot back, her composure faltering. But you smeared the entire family, Piers countered. You've allowed speculation to run wild. Millions now view the royals as racist based solely on your unverified claims. Surely you can see how that's a problem. Meghan's media polish was slipping fast. Her breathing quickened, her once perfect posture giving way to defensive body language. I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone else. My lived experience is valid. Your experience is valid, Piers agreed, his tone calm. But your accusations have consequences far beyond your personal story. They've strained Commonwealth relations, hurt people who've devoted their lives to service, and divided public opinion over claims no one can verify because you've given no specifics. "So you're blaming me for the reaction to racism?" she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm asking you to take responsibility for how you've presented your allegations," Piers responded firmly. "If someone made vague but damaging claims about you without evidence, how would you feel?" Meghan stood again, pacing behind her chair. Camera operators adjusted their angles as her team exchanged anxious looks off-camera. "This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away," she said, her voice trembling. "You care more about protecting the institution than protecting me." "I care about the truth," Piers replied steadily. "You made serious accusations without the evidence needed to back them up. That's not protecting anyone. That's responsible journalism." "Responsible journalism?" Meghan laughed bitterly. "You're just another member of the British establishment trying to silence me." Piers let the accusation hang before responding. "Meghan, I've spent my career challenging power and asking tough questions. That's exactly what I'm doing now." "By attacking a woman of color who's trying to speak her truth," she shot back, her voice cracking. "By asking a public figure to provide evidence for serious public allegations," Piers corrected. "Your race and gender don't shield you from scrutiny when your words impact millions. Equality means being held to the same standards as everyone else." The words seemed to hit her hard. Meghan froze, struggling to find a response. "That's completely unfair," she finally said. "You don't understand what it's like to be in my position." "You're right," Piers said quietly. "I don't. But I do understand what it means to be responsible for the truth. And that's what viewers deserve." Meghan returned to her seat, visibly shaken. The confident, composed woman who had walked in was gone. "Let's talk about your father," Piers continued, consulting his notes. "You've publicly estranged yourself from the man who raised you, who paid for your education, who walked you down the aisle. Yet you embraced a family you say treated you poorly. Help us understand that choice." "My father betrayed me," Meghan said quickly. "He sold stories to the press. He staged photographs. He chose money over his daughter. He made mistakes," Piers acknowledged. "But he was under media pressure, dealing with health issues, trying to handle the chaos. Did you ever consider he might have needed your support, not your rejection?" Meghan flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the full story." "Then tell me the full story," Piers said simply. "Help me understand how the man who supported your rise became someone you could cut off so completely." "He made his choices," Meghan said coldly. "And I made mine. Even after his heart attack? Even when he was struggling?" Piers pressed. "You chose a father-in-law you barely knew over the man who raised you?" The question landed like a blow. Meghan's composure cracked, tears welling in her eyes, not of grief, but frustration. "You're being cruel," she whispered. "I'm being honest," Piers replied gently but firmly. "And honesty isn't always comfortable. But it matters." The atmosphere in the studio was electric. The interview had gone far beyond its expected tone. What had begun as a conversation had become an intense confrontation. Meghan sat stiffly, her eyes glistening, while Piers remained calm and composed, the unshakable interviewer meeting an unraveling public figure. "Meghan," he said softly, "I know this is difficult, but these are the questions millions of people are asking. If you're going to make public statements that affect so many lives, surely you can understand why those statements need to be examined." "Examined or attacked?" Meghan shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. "Because there's a difference, and you've crossed that line. I've asked you for evidence to support serious allegations you've made publicly," Piers replied calmly. "I've asked you to explain contradictions in your statements. I've asked you about relationships you've discussed openly in other interviews. These aren't attacks, Meghan. These are the questions any responsible journalist would ask. Meghan wiped at her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. You're just like all the rest of them. You can't stand that I spoke out, that I refused to stay silent and just take it. Actually, I admire people who speak out, Piers said, leaning back slightly. I've built my career on speaking out, on challenging authority, on refusing to accept easy answers. But speaking out comes with responsibility. It means being prepared to defend your statements, to provide evidence for your claims, and to face scrutiny. That's the price of having a platform. I don't need to defend my lived experience to you or anyone else, Meghan declared, her voice rising sharply. Several crew members exchanged uneasy glances as the tension in the room thickened. But you do need to defend public allegations that damage other people's reputations, Piers countered firmly. You've accused people of racism without providing specifics. You've claimed you were denied help for mental health issues, but the palace has records showing multiple resources were offered to you. You've painted yourself as a victim while cutting off family members who supported you for years. These aren't private experiences, Meghan. These are public statements with public consequences. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back. I'm done with this. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who clearly has an agenda. My only agenda is the truth, Piers replied, remaining seated, his voice steady despite the storm unfolding in front of him. And, if that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Because you're twisting everything I say, Meghan practically screamed, her composure fully shattered. You're taking my words out of context. You're minimizing my experiences, and you're more concerned about protecting a racist institution than about justice. I'm asking for evidence of racism, Piers said, his voice firm. You keep calling it a racist institution, but you haven't provided a single concrete example. You've made vague allegations about conversations regarding your son's skin color, but you won't say who said what, when, or in what context. How is anyone supposed to address these allegations without details? Meghan began gathering her things from the small table beside her chair, her hands shaking with rage. I don't have to prove anything to you. The very fact that you're demanding proof shows exactly the kind of person you are. The kind of person who believes in evidence-based reporting. Piers raised an eyebrow. The kind of person who thinks serious allegations should be backed up with facts. Yes, Meghan. That's exactly the kind of person I am. That's what journalists are supposed to be. You're not a journalist, Meghan spat, her voice dripping with contempt. You're a bully with a television show who gets off on tearing people down. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Piers remained calm, but there was a flash of steel in his eyes. Meghan, he said quietly, I've interviewed terrorists, dictators, and some of the most dangerous people on earth. I've held prime ministers accountable, exposed corruption, and challenged some of the most powerful institutions in the world. If asking you to provide evidence for public allegations you've made makes me a bully, then I'm proud to be one. Meghan's face twisted with fury. How dare you compare me to terrorists and dictators? I'm not comparing you to anyone, Piers replied evenly. I'm explaining that difficult questions are part of serious journalism, regardless of who's sitting in that chair. You don't get special treatment just because you're upset, or because you've decided that scrutiny equals bullying. This interview is over, Meghan announced, standing and removing her microphone with shaking hands. I won't be subjected to this kind of treatment. You're certainly free to leave, Piers said, making no move to stop her. But walking away when faced with difficult questions doesn't make those questions disappear. It just makes you look like you can't answer them. Meghan froze halfway through taking off the microphone. Piers's words had landed. For a brief moment, it looked like she might sit back down. Instead, she yanked the microphone off completely, the harsh feedback screeching through the speakers. "You know what?" she said coldly. "This whole thing is going to backfire on you. People will see this for what it really is. A powerful man using his platform to attack a woman who dared to speak truth to power. They'll see a journalist asking legitimate questions of a public figure who made serious public allegations," Piers replied calmly. "And they'll see someone who couldn't answer those questions walking away instead of facing scrutiny. Let the viewers decide what that means." Meghan grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. She turned back once more. "You're going to regret this, Piers. This isn't over." "It never is," he said, watching her go. "Truth has a way of coming out eventually, no matter who tries to suppress it." As Meghan stormed off the set, her team scrambling to follow her, Piers turned back to the camera with remarkable composure. "Well," he said, straightening his tie, "I think that speaks for itself, doesn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, when public figures make serious public allegations, they should be prepared to defend those allegations with facts, not emotional manipulation or accusations of bullying when faced with legitimate questions. That's what we do here. We ask the questions that need to be asked, even when they're uncomfortable, even when people don't want to answer them, because the truth matters more than anyone's comfort level." The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of equipment. What had just unfolded was clear. A confrontation between hard questions and evasive answers. One person holding the line, and one walking away. Sometimes, Piers concluded, the most revealing moments aren't in the answers people give, but in the ones they refuse to give.